Spinning ball, we are live. Hey everyone, happy Thursday, I think. Is it Thursday? Yeah, Thursday. I am here with our favorite microbiologist, Kiran Krishnan. Thank you for joining us, man.
My pleasure. So
Uh,
it feels like it's been a long time. So I've been
yeah, we used to
looking
do these
forward
like
to
every 3 weeks, I think. So now it's been
it.
a few months and it feels like a year.
Right,
So
totally. Yeah,
I
this is
wonder how many
fun.
countries you've been in since you were last on.
It's crazy. At least 15. At least.
Yeah.
Yes, it's been good.
What's been your favorite one the last few months?
So I was in Paris a couple weeks ago, and I always love Paris. It's just something about the city and the food and the people. It's such a refreshing place to go to. When you see like the Eiffel Tower or the Arc de Triomphe, they look like celebrities because you see these things all over the place.
Yeah,
It's
TV
in
postcards.
person. Totally, you're like, wow, I'm in Paris actually. So that was really fun. But I get to go to New Zealand twice this year. I'm speaking in New Zealand twice, and I've never been. Uh,
Cool.
so I'm really looking forward to that. One is in a couple of months, and then the other is in September. So that's and Romania too. I've never been to Romania, so I'm speaking at a big gastroenterology conference there.
Do you have a
Uh,
big map that you mark them all off on?
no, I should. I wish I was that organized and, and interesting, but I really should. That'd be awesome to do that.
Oh, we should introduce you a little. I do have a lot of friends either from New Zealand, live in New Zealand, or go to New Zealand a lot. If you want any tips for wherever you're going to be,
Yeah, I would love
in
awesome.
the digital entrepreneur world, New Zealand is very popular to go spend some time in
That's what I've
and
heard.
live there and work because it's gorgeous and the people are super nice. So there might even be some on here. There's always Kiwis on our things, and I hope that's an endearing term. I don't know that, so maybe I shouldn't say that. Anyways, Kiran, you're Chief Science Officer at Microbiome Labs and also studied microbiology at University of Iowa. You want to just tell people a quick, brief little snippet on how you became so interested in this subject and kind of why you do what you do?
Yeah, so I mean, as a microbiologist, I've always had an affinity for bacteria. It's interesting when you start your microbiology studies, and then when you get into the research side, a lot of what you're using bacteria for is to study disease and bacteria that cause disease. But then you're also trying to learn how cells function by looking at bacteria, because effectively all of our cells are basically made up of ancient bacteria, right? So we really get to understand cellular function by studying the function of bacteria, which can be controlled and so on. So I've always had an affinity that bacteria play a significant role in our lives. And then it wasn't until the Human Microbiome Project started coming out with studies where we really saw it more definitively that bacteria really control virtually everything. And to me, it was almost like like a hurrah, finally, like, yes, now we really understand how bacteria can impact our system. And then the most important part is we finally started looking at good bacteria, because most of what everyone knows is bad bacteria. And we need to kill 99.9% of germs and microbes and antibiotics, and we live in this very antibiotic world. So it was very exciting to see the beneficial role that bacteria plays in the body. And so that was a natural fit for me, and I jumped right in both feet first, in all aspects of that: probiotics, prebiotics, microbiome, and so on. And here we are.
And then it's been chaos ever since. For those who don't know, like the joke where he was in different countries, he's getting a hold of this guy. He's like an international man of microbiome mystery. So
The biggest nerd of them all.
yeah, yeah, and he's always in a different state or city or country or something whenever I try to talk to him. So we're seeing some people with some tech issues. Frozen screen. Uh, seems most people are fine. Hold on. If you're having issues and you can't see me, Chrome is usually better than Firefox.
Mm-hmm.
Pressing the play arrow helped me. Nice. Or press the play arrow. Okay. Yeah, rejoin if webinar isn't working for you, reload browser. Okay. Okay, so all right, so hopefully enough people are seeing and hearing us. The numbers keep going up and people aren't dropping off. So we'll go with that. Today we're going to talk about some chronic and acute gut infections, and I dropped a little hints in the email about one little resilient friend of ours that lived 25 million years in a bee, and tied that into bees. Also, producing something that can help us. So, which is funny. I was just at a conference this last weekend and met and chatted with Paul Stamets.
Oh,
And
cool.
he's created a bunch of extracts now that are curing the diseases, many of the diseases that are killing the bees.
Wow.
From reishi mushrooms, chaga mushrooms, and one that I can't pronounce, but enough so that it had 100% effectiveness, and they're working on getting it out in mass distribution.
Wow.
We'll
And
have more on that.
they're
What was
treating
that?
bees with it? They're treating bees with it?
Yeah, every single bee on the planet is now infected with this. It's called like mutated wing disease or damaged wing disease or something. It makes their wings grow deformed, and so their pollination period drops from 9 days to 3. So even the bees that aren't being killed, they're 1/3 as effective as they would be normally. And his extract cured it completely. So they're reversing it generation by generation with the bees. The wings are going back to normal. And there was 3 other diseases that they've been working on, reducing. Some of them were effective 700 to 1 reduction in viral load in the titers that they were taking on the bees with his mushroom extracts. So now they're working on mass distribution and things of that nature. So there will be a recording for the people who registered. Yes, that'll go out. So let's get into that. So these infections, whether they're acute, like something, I guess that would be almost like a food poisoning or something that's causing symptoms right now or noticeable, versus chronic infections and overgrowths of various types of aggressive bacteria. Why are we seeing what seems like so much more of that now than we probably did even 20 years ago?
Yeah, so the biggest reason is the loss of diversity and ecological imbalance, right? So we know that a very diverse microbiome protects against outside invading bacteria, viruses, and other forms of pathogens as well. So the biggest issue is having that loss of diversity. So one thing we have to be really cognizant of is that virtually every part of our body is covered with some sort of microbe or the other. Even areas that were presumed to be sterile for decades, we thought urine was sterile. We thought our blood was sterile, that there were no bacteria in there. 25 years ago, if a doctor found a bacteria in your blood, they would all be freaking out that you're on the road to sepsis. Now we come to know that there's about 1,000 bacteria cells per milliliter of blood, and we all have about 5,500 milliliters of blood in our system. So we know that our cerebral spinal fluid is full of viruses and bacteria, including papilloma virus and herpes simplex and all kinds of things that we wish we didn't have in our system. But everything is covered in microbes. And so there is a homeostatic ecology in all of these parts. And the way an acute infection or a late infection can take hold is if you have a dysfunction in that homeostasis. And the best that we can describe right now, the structure of the homeostasis, is through looking at the diversity in the microbiome. So as our microbiome diversity shrinks, we become way more susceptible to latent infections and acute infections as well. And we know, I mean, we've talked about so many times all of the things in our ecosystem that creates that dysfunction in the diversity. One of the main ones now being, of course, Roundup and herbicides. We're coming to recognize that those have a severe perturbation in our microbiome and shrink diversity quite a bit. But the other driver is food. We're not eating a very diverse diet anymore, and that makes us more less diverse and makes us more susceptible to infections. Oh, you're muted. You're silent.
Yeah, I figured it out. I was typing to someone. So you're saying there's no one answer. So
Well,
it can be.
It's not a question of just being exposed to more things. It's not a question of having a higher prevalence of pathogenic bacteria or viruses. That was some of the ideology that was going around. But now we're starting to understand it's really the lack of the other 99% of microbes that prevent the pathogens from taking hold. That's really what's causing the issue.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And a lot of the people in here have probably attended our webinars before or seen you on presentations with us, and or they're very familiar with the flagship probiotic you guys created. It's got to be 5 years ago now.
Yeah, we're in our 6th year.
Wow, that's crazy. Megaspore biotic, and it's bacillus spore forming organisms, and we've seen a lot of amazing results with thousands of people at this point, which is pretty much what built our whole microbiome series of webinars, was all those people wanting to get more questions and more answers and helping them out with stuff outside of using the spores and things like that. So people are pretty familiar with those, especially in the functional medicine space. Now, I don't think I go a day now on my own social media without seeing a friend or colleague of mine hosting you on something. So
Right.
either on a summit or an interview or a webinar or something. So a lot of people know. So there's kind of one of the 5, it's 5, right? 5 strains.
Yeah.
There's one that's kind of the superstar in Megaspore that does a lot of the heavy lifting. And for those who saw the email, that's what I was referencing, is a Bacillus subtilis organism was found in the gut of a bee that was fossilized in amber for 25 million years, and they were able to take it back out of the bee and bring it back to life.
Yeah, a 25-million-year-old bacteria that was fossilized. They could still plate it, and it was still alive. That's how robust this species of organism is.
Wow.
And when you look at Bacillus subtilis that were pulled out of glacial ice cores from 2, 3, 4 million years ago, their genetic homology to today's Bacillus subtilis is like 95% or greater. So they've hardly changed over the last dozens of millions of years. Because they're so well adapted to be in our environment, and then in particular in our gut. So they're really, really exciting bacteria. We've been in the microbiology world, we've been studying and working with Bacillus subtilis as a tool almost in microbiology for decades. That and E. coli are the 2 most well-known bacteria inside and out in the world of microbiology. And so, it's so exciting to have one of the most robust subtilis bacteria that we've seen in the Megaspore. And we just finished a couple of studies with just the subtilis, and then with the combination of our subtilis and coagulants. It's really interesting. We have this antibiotic-induced dysbiosis model from the SHINE model from the guys in Belgium. And what we've been able to show is that when you treat the microbiome with clindamycin, or in this case, I think it was a Cipro, and the clindamycin being the fluoroquinoline, we found that there was a significant dysbiosis over a 2-week period, and then we were able to reverse most of that dysbiosis even within 3 weeks just by adding the spores back in. And we saw that effect with just the subtilis, but then with the subtilis and the coagulants mix, and then of course we've seen that now with Megaspore with the Roundup study, where we've been able to create a significant dysbiosis with Roundup. But the subtilis is really potent at going in, identifying pathogens, and bringing down the growth of pathogens. So they're going to be one of your best friends in terms of that intelligent antimicrobial effect. One more mention, we finished round 1 of our C. diff study at Cleveland Clinic. So it's going to be a 2-year long study with many different variables and all that. But the first variable was, can Megaspore as a probiotic clear the C. diff infection? And we saw that the Megaspore cleared the C. diff infection relatively quickly, and then improved the integrity of the gut. And then this is in a mouse model, it also increased the length of the GI tract, which suffers some sort of enteropathy when C. diff gets in there and starts messing up the lining and the structure of the intestines. So all of these things lead to this idea that the subtilis, the spores in the Megaspore, the consortium, together do an amazing job of attacking pathogens, bringing them down, bringing infectious bacteria down, and then reestablishing the actual structure of the intestinal lining and the intestines themselves.
That's pretty wild. That, for those who don't know, the class of antibiotics you're referencing are pretty much the most aggressive virulent, the fluoroquinolones. Is that how you say it?
Fluoroquinolones, yes.
Yeah. There's whole entire Facebook groups of people who have gotten derailed.
The side effects are horrendous. I mean, in fact, somebody I know very closely, he's older, but it's a year now, and he still has neurological issues from taking it. And one of the most common things is tendon ruptures, your Achilles tendon ruptures. I mean, it's really a significantly toxic antibiotic. And we see that when we're using it in the microbiome models, that it causes significant perturbations in a very short amount of time. But the good news is you can rescue that. Somehow there's a memory with how your microbiome is supposed to look like, and the spores, when they're in there, can facilitate that regeneration of the normal part of the population.
That's fascinating. So you guys a while back put out just the plain Bacillus subtilis in a high dose, because I don't know how much subtilis is in a dose of Megaspore, but it is 1 of 5. And then we've been using the subtilis. So there's a HU58, which is high dose Bacillus subtilis. And my wife, for those who don't know or haven't been watching our videos or stuff, went through a pretty serious autoimmune situation last year, and gut repair is obviously at the heart of any approach to autoimmune. And she also she had a lot of unneeded and unwanted results on her gut tests for infections and organisms and such. And the only antimicrobials we used was the high dose Bacillus subtilis, and then the Mycobalance, which we'll talk about in a minute. But we didn't use any others, like no herbal carpet bombing approaches like I used to take with her protocol. And so can you speak on what the dosing difference is between what's in the Megaspore of the subtilis and then what's in the HU58? And it's more, we have never carried it before because it's more of a acute use type of product. It seemed like for certain situations, not necessarily as a maintenance type situation like Megaspore might be. So can you just speak on like the difference in the dosing, and then when it's appropriate, when it's called for, and when it might be wanted to be used?
Yeah, so in Megaspore, the subtilis is at 2 billion CFUs per daily dose. So, and that's in 2 caps. And that, does all the wonderful things that Megaspore does. But what we found is that if you have a serious infection issue, whether it's latent, even acute, if for some reason you're choosing not to use a antibiotic, or your doctor doesn't want you to use an antibiotic, it can significantly help even in acute conditions. A lot of people use it when they travel, if they end up with traveler's diarrhea. It's used as a prescription product in India and a bunch of other countries as for antibiotic-induced diarrhea and for traveler's diarrhea as well. So it is dosed at 5 billion CFUs of just the subtilis in the HU58 product, and that's per cap. But the dosing instructions will have you take as many as 2 caps a day. So you'd be taking as many as 10 billion of the subtilis. Now the subtilis it's such a fascinating organism, because a couple of the things that it does that's really interesting is, of course, it can identify pathogenic or overgrown organisms and help bring down the growth of those. But one of the things that it does is it produces biofilms, and it seems to cooperate with the good commensal bacteria and basically protect them under a biofilm. So the way biofilms work, and the vast majority of bacteria in your gut live in some sort of biofilm. And the biofilms become this lattice or a network for bacteria to not only live under, but to communicate and share extracellular compounds and so on. And so biofilms are really important to maintaining a good, healthy microbiome. So when you have a bacteria that can go in and create biofilms, as it's warding off the pathogens, you've got a microbe that can really stabilize your natural commensal bacterial microbiota. And so that's a really significant impact of the subtilis. So we use it as like an intelligent antimicrobial. If you suspect that you have an overgrowth of something, if there's an infectious bacteria, possibly even viruses and things like that, we send in and utilize the HU58 in lieu of using antimicrobials or an antibiotic. In the case of people that might, for SIBO and things like that may choose to use a rifaximin. So it works. Think of it as like an intelligent antimicrobial. I carry it with me when I travel. In fact, I use prophylactically 1 to 2 caps every day when I travel, just in case. And I've traveled with a lot of people, especially to places like India and the Philippines, where they've found themselves in a situation where they ate something that's not agreeing with them, and we've dosed them up with 2-3 caps of the HU58, and it's taking care of the problem. So, our philosophy always is use bacteria to control other bacteria, because they do it in a much more intelligent way. In some cases you will need an antimicrobial and antibiotic, but if you're dealing with this problem yourself and you've got what you believe is an infectious condition, or you're working with your doctor and he or she believes that it's an infectious condition, the HU58 can be really helpful.
Okay. Yeah, we did. We did. I think 6 months for her for all that stuff where we were using. Now it's kind of like occasionally if somebody's not feeling well, or I've been taking it while we had a huge stock of it. And I travel not quite as much as you, but quite a bit. And I throw one in every time that I'm going to be on a flight or eating somewhere strange or being in a weird place. So we are going to, and a lot of our audience, like I said, make the rounds now on the internet. So a lot of our people have been asking us to carry the HU58 so that they can order it. So that's going to be in our shop now, and that's part of the reason why we wanted to provide this education around it, so that people understood what the difference is, when it would be usable, when appropriate.
And one I should mention, so when you're starting Megaspore, like let's say you've never taken it and your gut is messed up, you suspect there is an overgrowth of some sort, or you're working with a doctor and whatever the symptomology you've looked at or tests you've looked at, and you suspect there's an overgrowth of something not favorable, you can actually start the Megaspore and the HU58 at the same time. Of course, you want to taper on those and make sure that you don't have, really severe die-off. But surprisingly, the die-off with HU58 is really minimal. I'm not sure what that mechanism is, where it minimizes the type of Herxheimer reaction that people typically get when you start getting rid of bad bacteria. But the die-off is really minimal. So you can either start them both at the same time, or just start with the HU58, do that for a period of 3 or 4 weeks, and then transition into the Megaspore. If you have a more severe condition and you really suspect overt pathogens, like in the case of Mira, then you could stay on. We have something called the C. diff, or the antibiotic protocol, which is a combination of the HU58, the Megaspore, and the Restore Flora, for a period of 2, 3, 4 months, depending on the severity of what you believe is the infection. So we do that, and that seems to have a lot of success. We do that a lot with people that have SIBO, that don't want to take the Xifaxan. We do that with people that they or we suspect have some sort of overgrowth or latent infection in there, and it really works well.
I'm trying to do the box and the questions. Yeah, that layering, that's kind of what we did. But thank you, by that way, for all the help with that.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it's night and day versus a couple of times ago when we talked. So I was telling him before we came on the air that she's doing so well, we're not even reordering the labs.
That's the best.
That's usually like 6 months after something like that, you kind of reorder a lot of the labs to check the progress, to see what's responsible for the symptoms that you're still having, and where can you still tweak protocols and whatever. And she doesn't really have symptoms. So mark the questions as I'm going. I don't know if you guys can, though. There's a little circle next to your question. So I'm trying to stay on top of that too. But if you know it's a question, if you can mark that little red thing, that if you can see that when I do it, that'll help me find them towards the end. This is a new format for Webinar Jam since the last time we used it, which is pretty much every time we use it, it's a new format. Thanks, Webinar Jam. So, all right. So, Margaret, if you lost transmission, I would just try to log out and log back in, or refresh your browser, which you won't hear me because you're looking at the chat. Okay, so that's the HU58, and basically that was just us answering your demand from our people that wanted to be able to access it. So that'll be available in the shop, and we will have this recorded. We'll have transcripts of this. I'm going to create some posts on the site that are specific to it. Sounds like people are having some issues. Hopefully they can get back on. Please just log out, log back in, and or refresh the link browser. So, okay. We'll provide more education around that. So,
yeah, here's a couple of exciting new tidbits. I shared this actually on Facebook a little while ago, but we completed a study where we're looking at neurotransmitters that are being produced by the subtilis, because subtilis has been shown to have some impact on the production of neurotransmitters. So this is in a bioreactor study, because we didn't want to have the influence of any other microbes in the body or anything else. So we just want to see subtilis on its own, what type of neurotransmitters can it produce. And as it turns out, it's producing about 7 different neurotransmitters. 2 of the ones that we've identified that are relatively measurable doses are serotonin and dopamine. So, this is a bacteria that's going in. Not only is it, helping you get rid of harmful and overgrown bacteria, supporting and increasing the growth of your good commensals, blanketing them with a really healthy, good biofilm to protect them. Of course, they're producing enzymes and B vitamins and all of these other things. On top of that, they're producing your happy hormone and your dopamine as well to feed the reward centers of your brain. So it's really significant. And then the other impact of dopamine is that, of serotonin. Most of us think of it, as a brain part of the happy hormone, but more importantly, in the gut, serotonin is a major driver of peristalsis and kinetics in the gut. So bowel movements are controlled in large part by the production of serotonin. And one of the ways that one of the mechanisms behind which people end up with stasis or chronic constipation is because of low serotonin production. So that is something significant, and that could be really important for the SIBO folks as well, because we know that stasis and lack of bowel movement is a major driver of SIBO and the proliferation of bacteria in the wrong place.
That's interesting, because that's another one that's just been happening over and over. I'm in a couple of Facebook groups, and they'll do like some round of antibiotics and feel better for 2 weeks, and then it comes back worse than it was before. Mm-hmm. And because it doesn't address any of the underlying mechanisms of the peristalsis or the migrating motor complex, or why it was slowed down in the first place. So
right.
I am trying to stay on top of the questions. Okay, so that is the HU58 in the subtilis, the little superstar that's invincible. Also, I always laugh because it survived 25 million years in amber alive, and a lot of probiotics aren't supposed to be left off on a shelf for 10 minutes.
Right. Refrigerated.
So it's just kind of
makes difference. There's a difference.
It's always kind of just funny. I don't know if I get to keep the question box or not to those who are asking. I'll try to see if I can. In the past, I couldn't, but perhaps we can. So I will try to see if that's possible. I don't know. It's not up to us. It's up to if that's allowed now, currently in the format in this iteration of Webinar Jam. So
you can highlight and copy and paste this stuff.
Yeah, I think I could probably do it into a Word document.
Yeah.
So I could try to do that. So the other thing, we were talking about bees, and since the early days of our webinars, there was kind of a rumbling that you guys were going to try to put together something for a Candida reduction management of yeast situation, and that was a few years ago. And fast forward, and now that exists. And can you share a little bit around, it is made up of undesalinic acid and bee propolis,
mm-hmm.
and again, the bees, and So in many ways, the bees are going to save us. And can you just chat? There's so many different, dude. If you go on, all right. So I have like Full Script, right, which is the online pharmacy dispensary, whatever you want to call it, for supplements for doctors and practitioners. If I type in yeast or candida on there, there's about 117 different things that market themselves as yeast or candida treatment. Some of them have lots of ingredients. Some of them only have one or two. Yours has primarily two, I think. And why those two? Why did you decide to go with those two? And I've not seen bee propolis in any of the other ones. So what's the logic there?
Yeah, so that shocked me when I looked at Candida products. So again, if people know our company, you know that we're never going to be a company that just comes out with products just because they're hot and fun and other people are doing it. We really only put together products of what we think are of significant need and that nobody else is doing it quite the right way out there. So we looked at a lot of those Candida products and then we started digging into the research of what are some of the most potent anti-candida specifically, along with other yeasts, but ones that have been proven to work against candida, and at least a few dozen of the versions of candida, because albicans is just one. There's like 200 different types of candida that could be in your body. And so our research, because we're focused on the research side of things, led us to the acknowledgement that propolis is one of the most potent antifungal compounds there is. And propolis has all of these studies specifically on candida, and not just candida albicans, but all of the different serotypes or strains of candida that exist. There's one study that showed that propolis, the same small 250 milligram dose, was basically able to control all 25 different types of candida that they tested quite significantly. And then when you get into the other yeast, it had effect across the board as well. And then when you look at, where is propolis found? Well, bees, going back to the intelligence of bees, they pull the resin known as propolis out of the flowers, and then they impact their honeycombs with it because it's both an antimicrobial and a antifungal. But it has this special effect of preserving things. And so that's how a honeycomb can sit out there in 110 degree heat with sugar in it, essentially honey, and not spoil and not end up with a big fungal infection. So bees have been using propolis to protect their honeycomb structures for a long time. And when we started looking at all of the studies that were there, it shocked us that nobody had it in their candida products because it's such a powerful component in controlling candida. The undercyclinic acid is also very hard to find in candida products. And that is really important because the undercyclinic acid actually goes after the hyphae. So one of the things that occurs when you have yeast is that they'll sit on the surface of the tissue, but they will barb into the tissue with their hyphae. And if you use a antifungal by itself, it might kill off the surface yeast, but the hyphae are still barbed into your tissue. And the moment the antifungal is gone, the yeast will just come right back because the root or the hyphae is still there. So the combination of the two, the propolis being a strong antifungal and especially shown to target candida and be able to bring down the growth of candida significantly, that was significant and important. And then the undercyclinic acid that can go after the hyphae so that you can actually liberate that real estate that candida was taken up. And then if you're taking the megaspore along with it, that real estate will be covered by some good functional commensal bacteria. So, one of the evidence to me that the supplement industry is just a big Me Too industry, across the board is you look at how these products are formulated. You look at all of the various candida products that are out there, everyone just kind of copies one another and does maybe a slightly different tweak. And it shocked me that nobody had propolis in there, and it's so well defined as an anti-candida product. Now, here's the other thing. We found one study on propolis that showed that taking it orally can actually alleviate candida in other parts of the body. So that's another exciting thing because, if you just take an antifungal orally, you don't know if it's just going to, go after candida that's in your gut. And a lot of people that have candida issues have candida in other parts of the body as well that are overgrowing. So that was the other thing that excited us about the propolis. So we think that combination, just those two, is enough. We don't need to try to make the product look robust and just throw a whole bunch of stuff in there. Plus, the more things you throw in there, the less you know about how they all work together. And so, we try to keep it simple, try to keep it effective. And we ended up being compelled to have to develop this product because we didn't find any really solid solutions for Candida. And even though we don't really market or encourage use of antimicrobials all the time, we don't kill a lot of stuff. In this case, in the case of Candida, we found that people who have really severe overgrowths, it's really hard to get that under control without an appropriate antifungal. So that's why we came up with that product. But it's a different approach. And, you can just Google all this on Google Scholar. If you go, or you look at PubMed, look at the studies on propolis and Candida. It's very significant.
I saw some of them cited on your site, and I'm familiar with propolis because I work in this field. But I watched they talked about propolis in one of the Paul Stamets presentations about bees and the conditions. The wing disease that was affecting the bees was impacting their ability to harvest the sap that was then being used to make the propolis, which was then leading to more unwanted organisms being able to flourish within the hive.
Yep, exactly.
And it all went back to the propolis, and then he went on a rant about how propolis kills everything, and it's like the bees antibiotic and antifungal and If nobody's seen Paul Stamets speak, look him up and watch his YouTube videos. I'll do everyone a favor. If you're interested in mushrooms or bees, because now those two worlds are one. So,
and another thing about propolis.
Yeah, go ahead.
The other thing I really liked about it is propolis is known to have healing capabilities too on tissue, and so and although we don't have specific evidence on this in the gut, but my thinking was that it might play a role, of course, not only in controlling the yeast and helping alleviate the infection that the yeast has been causing, but it might help with the healing process of the tissue where the yeast was, and the tissue now has been damaged because of the Candida. So we know that Candida can feed off of some of the top layer of the tissue, and so a lot of the overgrowth of Candida will leave damaged tissue. And that was the other kind of thing. And we don't have specific evidence for that, but there is evidence that propolis can be a healing compound too. So again, it shocked us that nobody was doing it, and that's the only reason why we ended up coming out with our own, because we think it's the best approach to dealing with the Candida overgrowth.
Wow. Amazing. And it's just funny that it's just there. The bees just make it.
Yeah.
So, we did about 6 months of that too for her protocol, because her yeast numbers on the organic acids test were off the chart and had every symptom known to man and everything. And it was funny because when we shared that she was ill and we were doing this aggressive treatment for her, everyone wanted to know what she was doing or what she was taking or whatever. And I mentioned the Mega Microbalance, and they're like, "What? Where do you get that? How do you get that?" And we were privileged enough to receive it a few months before it was on the market. Thank you for that.
Got the pre-production bottles. We actually, our first run, we only made 400 bottles, mostly to work with our patients and some of the close doctors we work with, because that's what we do with everything. We want the studies, and then there's clinical use, and we wanted to really understand the impact on the clinical use. And that's what the bottles you got were of that first batch. So you got the early stuff, which is great.
Yeah, it was awesome. Thank you so much. And I started taking some too, just to try it out myself, and I noticed that my sweet cravings went down pretty dramatically when I started taking it.
Yeah, me too. That's one of I take it occasionally, especially once I've traveled and I've eaten out a lot. And inevitably, when I'm traveling and I'm eating out, I'm eating more sugar than I really should be. And so when I come back, I hammer myself a little bit with the Mega Microbalance for 4 or 5 days, and I find that sugar craving that I created from traveling comes down quite a bit.
That you created from traveling?
Exactly.
You mean ordering dessert at dinner?
Yep, ordering dessert and having that wine, and and then like when you fly, if you fly as much as me and you get to fly, upgraded to business class and so on, they feed you really well on these long flights. They offer you all kinds of stuff, and you're sitting there and you feel like you want to reward yourself. And so you're still working through, the psychology of feeding yourself the desserts and the wine and all that stuff. But the good news is you can
giving you a hard time.
Yeah, you can
it wasn't even something I realized that I had was sweet craving type thing.
I definitely do.
So I give Mirish a hard time about that. I didn't used to have a sweet tooth or sweet cravings until I lived with her, and she does and did. And so then I started eating desserts, and then it's a downhill spiral. But yeah, I noticed that effect from it. So the propolis, the undesalinic acid called Mega Mycobalance, and that's also one that we've been getting asked for quite a bit because people see you around talking about it. So we've added that and the HU58 to our store. I'm trying to get the links to post a sticky message that will be up on top of, let me see. It will be up on top of the screen. And what we're going to do, we like to, celebrate something being placed into the store. So we're going to do $5 off either one or both of those products for, I think, until Monday is when that's going to go. I'm trying to see. I might have reached the maximum characters I can post in one sticky message, but I am trying. And the code is... Sorry, I had this queued, but then the questions went crazy. So it is RHT58. So it's in our shop, both of those products now. And the code is RHT58. Will save $5 off either one of those products. Those links should be at the top of the chat box. Now, oh no, hold on. My dog is crying. All right, so there's a ton of questions, and I want to try to get to the questions.
Yeah, let's do that.
So let's do that.
There's one here that Julie just asked, which is an important question. She asked if Megaspore itself is enough long-term to maintain diversity, or should we rotate with probiotics? That's an important question, and we've always said that no other probiotics have any impact on your diversity, right? Because if you have a probiotic, even if it has 15 different lacto and bifido strains, even if they colonize, which most of them don't survive through the stomach, most of them don't colonize, even if they did, you're not really impacting diversity. In part because your microbiome has anywhere from 800 to 1,000 different species. So adding 15 in there is not really going to do much of anything. And here's the thing about lactobacillus. Although there are lots of really beneficial and good, important lactobacillus strains, with respect to your microbiome, lactobacillus actually is a very small component of the microbiome. It's in like the 4th percentile. So it's a very, very small player within the microbiome. So when we're talking about diversity, it's really about increasing all of these really important, strict, obligate anaerobic bacteria that most of us haven't even heard of, most of the strains. I mean, there are names of strains that we could say that you've never even heard of. Some of the ones that are becoming popular now are like Akkermansia and Fecalum bacteria, but there's all kinds of proteobacteria and actinobacters and different species that you've never heard of. Those are the ones that need to be increased in diversity. So what we've done, actually, we have a study that's going to be publishing in the next couple of months showing that when you add Megaspore into the microbiome, it can increase the diversity of your microbiome by up to 50%. So the average we saw was in the mid 40s. The highest we saw was in the 50% range. What that means is a couple of things. One is diversity in the microbiome is measured in 2 ways. One is the richness of the organism. That means how many different bacteria you actually have in your microbiome. But the other part of it, which is equally important, is uniformity. So you can have a large number of bacteria, but if they're not uniform, meaning a good proportion of them at such low levels that they're almost non-functional, and then a handful of them are very predominant, that still doesn't afford diversity and all of the benefits that diversity offers. So you need to have uniformity and the richness in population. That is measured by something called the Simpson Reciprocal Index. So when we did our study, we saw that reciprocal index increased by almost 50%. So like I mentioned, between 40 and 50%, on average around it was 44%, the highest was about 50. That means we're almost doubling the diversity in the microbiome by adding in the spores. Nothing has been shown to be able to do that. There's not a paper out there that you can find of a probiotic or any component or compound that can increase the diversity of your 100 trillion organisms in the gut by 40 to 50%. So you really don't need anything else. The only other thing that bumped it up a little bit is when you added the prebiotic to it. That's
pretty wild.
It's crazy, yeah. And this was in 3 weeks. This was a study that was done with diversity in the microbiome when you add in a probiotic.
Wow. Wait, where is that being run?
The study was done in Belgium.
Okay.
And it's going through peer review in a journal right now.
All right. That's amazing. You guys have a lot of studies going on. I know about a handful of them, but I'm sure there's some I don't know about. So it is starting to limit how far back I can go on the thing. So I scrolled all the way to the end, and I'm going to start at the end and just try to get through as many questions as we can in the next 20-ish minutes. Can the subtilis be helpful for UTIs? I have multiple questions here. I'm not sure if it's the same person asking multiple times or multiple questions, but there's a lot of pop-ups about UTIs in relation to any of this.
Yeah, so your urogenital mucosa is dictated by your gut mucosa. So if you're putting the subtilis in orally as a probiotic, it can help with the amplification of antimicrobial compounds in the rest of your mucosal tissue. So typically what people have done is they'll take the megaspore and the subtilis orally, and then they'll even use one capsule of megaspore intravaginally at night. So basically you can insert one capsule, go to sleep, and it'll dissolve naturally in the vaginal mucosa. And that can have an even more direct impact. But you do want to take it orally as well, because managing the antimicrobial compounds produced in the mucosa by the immune system is primarily done in the gut. So it can definitely help.
All right. For someone who cannot swallow soft gels, could it be squeezed into their mouth and still have the benefits? Propolis is some strong tasting stuff. I don't know if you want to go for that. That's probably why it has such a thick capsule.
It does, and the undicyclinic acid is the same too. I wouldn't encourage anyone to squirt that right into their mouth. If you can't take soft gels, I don't know. That's tough because I wouldn't want you to.
Both of those things taste awful. Propolis, I got used to a little bit because I used to take it from the local bee person at the farmer's market, but it's a tough one.
It is, yeah, and it could create sensitivity issues in the mouth too. So,
okay. Can someone? Let me see. All right, so let me see. I'm trying to get to them before they disappear. Stop typing for 2 minutes. No, I'm just kidding. Every time a new one comes on, I'm losing some from the back end. Quality of food versus variety of food. How would you weigh that in ultimate importance for microbiome?
So that's an interesting question. So in fact, if you think about it, you really can't get variety with low quality, right? Because low quality low quality are foods that tend to be heavily processed, and most of those foods are made up of 2 or 3 things. Most of them are made up of corn or soy or wheat, and so you're really not getting any variety in that low quality food to begin with. When we talk about getting a variety of food, we're talking about getting unprocessed vegetables, roots, tubers, seeds, and nuts. And what I always encourage people to do is to add in 1 new food a week. That's not hard to do. And the easiest way to do that is to go to like a local ethnic grocery store. I have a great Middle Eastern grocery store by me, and then there's a big one called H Mart, which is a Korean grocery store. And when I go there, I find like vegetables and fruits that you don't see at any other grocery store, like a star fruit or dragon fruit that you may not necessarily find in Whole Foods, or a different type of bok choy or cabbage or root and tuber that you don't find anywhere else. And you just chop it up and eat small amounts of it at some point during the week. So you don't have to figure out how to make a big fancy Middle Eastern meal or Asian meal. You just chop it up, add, sprinkle a little olive oil on it and consume it, and you're good to go. It's about eating a little bit of a lot of different things. So typically a low quality food is going to have very limited variety to begin with. Most processed foods are made up of the same 2-3 things.
I hear your voice in my head every time I'm at the grocery store to grab more different vegetables and tubers. Just so you know, you've made an impact. I hear a little Kiran on my shoulder saying, "Get that weird root vegetable."
Yeah, you don't know what that is. Get it.
Yeah, we've been buying yucca and making that, which is great. And we had
awesome.
a couple other ones too. We mash it and then put like garlic and ghee in it. It's really good. Histamine intolerance and or mast cell activation syndrome. I know mast cell activation syndrome is pretty tricky and complex. Regarding severe histamine reactions, we've had a lot of people report there's histamine Facebook groups, and that's one of the places where the megaspore first spread like wildfire, because in those health advocacy groups or disease groups, whatever you want to call them, when somebody has results of something and they post it, a million other people want to try the same thing. And the histamine, we had a lot of good reports back with, specifically with lowering histamine reactions just with the megaspore. I don't know if that's the subtilis doing it. And then the mast cell, I can't really speak on that. I haven't seen anything on that. So you have any response to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very complex system, this whole mast cell activation, which is driven by an increased amount of histamine to begin with. But the question really is, why is there so much histamine and why are we intolerant to it, right? Because histamine is a normal signaling compound that's produced by the body. Typically, it's produced, the body can produce it, but a lot of times it's a microbiome producing it to signal to the immune system that there is a latent infection of some sort going on. And then, of course, it can activate mast cells as well to turn on the allergic reaction. But at the end of the day, to me, the big imbalance occurs when we're producing too much histamine and we're not degrading it as well. Because the microbiome that produces histamine also can produce enzymes to break down the histamine once the signal has been sent. That's another part of the faltering. So here's how I envision this is happening, right? Because I think a lot of the overt production of histamine and then thus the activation of mast cells is coming from the microbiome producing too much histamine in response to the presence of chronic or latent infections. So think about your microbiome, and you lose diversity in the microbiome, right? Because of poor diet, lack of diversity in the diet, all of the antimicrobials we've experienced, especially antibiotics, herbicides, pesticides. So now you've got a shrunken diversity in your microbiome. That makes your microbiome more susceptible to latent and chronic infections. So now you've got a shrunken diversity in your microbiome. You've got prevalent chronic infectious viruses and bacteria. That alerts the microbiome to produce more histamine because it's chronically seeing all of these latent infections. So now you've got this overt production of histamine, but then because you have a low diversity in your microbiome, you don't have enough organisms there to break down the histamine after the signal has been sent. So that lack of diversity, to me, is driving upregulation of latent chronic infections, and then overt expression of histamine, and then also part of the reason why we're not breaking down the histamine, which is now being released and upregulating mast cell activation. So that, to me, is one of the big things that's not really discussed much in the whole issue of histamine intolerance and mast cell activation. So one of the ways to deal with that is to work on increasing diversity. So things like, dietary diversity, fasting can certainly help with increasing diversity. The spores, those kind of things that increase diversity, I think, can be quite significant for people with the histamine intolerance. A couple other things that might help. One of the things that could help shut down some of the mast cell activation is the upregulation of natural Treg cells. Probiotics, the presence of the spores do upregulate Treg cells. A couple other nutrients, vitamin A, vitamin D, and then omega-3 fatty acids, all have been shown to be able to help upregulate what's called a FOXP3 positive Treg cells. So try to increase the diversity in the ways we've talked about, and then add in vitamin A, vitamin D, somewhere around 4,000 or 5,000 IUs if you're not getting adequate sunlight, and then omega-3 fatty acids, and especially DHA. So DHA has been shown in particular to upregulate the FOXP3 positive Treg system. So you want high DHA, you want vitamin A, vitamin D, get your probiotics in, increase the diversity in your diet, and you should be able to start seeing some alleviation from that histamine issue.
So it's not complex at all.
Nah, simple stuff.
No, thank you for sharing all of that. That's like way off of what I always appreciate when you go off topic to answer some questions. So thank you. Your Barb says that she chatted with you briefly on Messenger about her 23-year-old son who's a carrier for C. diff, which came about after rifaximin. He got SIBO after Accutane, and now we're stuck on how to do treat the SIBO because of the C. diff. You recommended the IgG, but now wondering about the HU58.
Yeah, and and Barb, forgive me if I missed sending you a reply, but I thought I'd sent over what we have. We have the C. diff protocol that we use, which is a combination of the HU58, the Restore Flora, and then the Megaspore. Do you guys carry the Restore Flora, Mike?
I don't think so. Is that the
one with the
Saccharomyces boulardii?
Yeah.
I don't. No, we don't at this moment. You guys can find it around, or do you have? Is it just Saccharomyces boulardii? Is it your?
It's got a couple of spores in it.
Oh, it does. Okay.
Yeah, but if not, you can also get Saccharomyces boulardii product. You can use Florastore. That is, assuming you're not sensitive to dairy. But the idea there is you're doing 2, 2, and 2. You're doing 2 HU58s, 2 Megaspore, and 2 of the Saccharomyces boulardii of the Restore Flora product. And the way you're doing it is you're doing one of each in the morning with your first meal, and then again one of each sometime in the evening. And one of the ways that we can adjust that, you could start that way. One of the ways to adjust that is to do 1 HU58, 1 of the Saccharomyces boulardii in the morning, then your 2 Megaspore with your first meal, because we always recommend you taking it with a meal, and then sometime later on in the evening, either right before your dinner or your last meal of the day, you do another 1 HU58 and 1 Restore Flora. So just keep in mind 2, 2, and 2. You don't necessarily have to be really methodical about how you take it, but if you're getting all 2 of each of those in, that's shown to be really effective for us in helping people that have the recurrent or latent C. diff infection. So that's the protocol that we sent out. The IgG can be really useful as well, because the Mega IgG is basically a neutralizer. It comes in and neutralizes bacterial toxins. C. diff produces a lot of toxins that cause a lot of problems in the gut. So it can help neutralize that. It can help neutralize mold toxins, environmental toxins. So that just helps reduce the inflammation and the toxic environment within the gut.
All right. Thank you for that, Barb. I hope that was helpful. I'm going to try to put together a post on our site, too, that has a lot of those protocols so that people can find them easily. And now that our shop has most of your arsenal in it, I want to try to create some resources that make it easier to figure out what, when, and how, and why.
Yeah.
Do you know of something called Malassezia? Malassezia, Malassezia says that it has to do with factor in dermatitis.
Okay.
Sebaceous dermatitis.
Okay. Yeah. So like an inflammatory activation in the sebaceous gland itself.
Okay.
Right? So if I'm not mistaken, what that is so there are microbes in the sebaceous gland in your skin, and that's the gland that produces sebum. And there can be a flux of microbes up into the sebaceous gland or down into it from the top of the skin. And if you get an overt growth of unfavorable microbes in the sebaceous gland, it can cause significant inflammation. And that may be the root cause of this problem. And one of the things that happens is you get an overt production of sebum as well. So that causes swelling and more inflammation in the sebaceous gland area. We actually just finished a dermatology study with Megaspore. And it was really exciting because, number one, in the cohort that had acne, we saw a 45% reduction in acne lesions in 30 days. That was really significant, including inflammatory cytokines that are very acne specific, meaning like FAB2 that is specific for skin associated inflammation. But one of the things we did see as well, which may be beneficial in this question, is we saw a significant reduction in the amount of sebum. And so that in itself shows a reduction in inflammation in the sebaceous gland and changes in there where you're producing less sebum. So it's a less infectious environment or less inflammatory environment in the sebaceous gland itself. And that was just a spore, it's just Megaspore.
Okay, then that makes sense. Any duration that you would recommend to people for the I'm guessing for either of these, but long-term use of things that kill things? Well, the HU58 seems to be discriminatory, like it kind of decides, but the propolis with the undecylinic acid probably isn't something someone would want to take high doses of for indefinite periods of time.
Yeah, you really have to measure your symptoms and your response, right? So
okay.
For most people, we say take it for a month and then reevaluate where you are.
Okay.
And if you feel like things are under control, then go hard with the spores and the probiotics so that you can try to replace that real estate where the Candida was with bacteria so that the Candida is better controlled and it won't come back easy. And remember, while you're taking the Mega Microbalance, the Candida product, you should and continue taking the probiotic as well. You take them at the same time. You don't have to go in there hard with the anti-fungal and then wait and then do the probiotic. You want to do it at the same time because as you're removing the Candida and as you're removing the hyphae, especially, you're freeing up real estate on the gut lining and in other tissues. So you want to replace that real estate with something good. And that's one of the things that the spores do by increasing the diversity and the growth of your commensals. So do it a month at a time, evaluate after 30 days. If you feel you need more, go another 20 or 30 days and then reevaluate. It's not something you should be taking chronically.
Yeah, that's what I figured. Viral. There's several questions relating to Epstein-Barr and viruses and viral infections and things like that. Now, one of my go-tos for that is like high-dose medicinal mushroom extracts. There's a lot of research there with chaga, reishi, a few others. Agarikon is one I learned about this past weekend that I'd never heard of before. Yeah, we got to get you and Stamets in the same room, man. It would be really fun. I'm sure you're familiar with him.
Yeah.
So what about any of these things I know viruses are a different game. So any of the stuff here have antiviral properties to it?
So here's the interesting thing about viruses, especially if you're talking about EBV and latent viral infections that sit in places like your dorsal roots and your nerves. EBV sits in this head neck region. It can be anywhere in your body, or in the case of, I think there was one question about maybe herpes simplex or papillomavirus, which can sit in other parts of the body. So viruses do a really good job of, going latent, of hiding from the immune system, like conducting this molecular mimicry that tricks the immune system so we can't find it. And that's how they remain dormant and latent and sitting there in your body for long periods of time without getting removed. But one of the things that we need in order to get rid of the viral infection is really well-regulated and differentiated macrophages and dendritic cells. So macrophages, especially something called peripheral macrophages. So these are the macrophages that float around all different parts of your body and look for things that shouldn't be there and swallow them. It's up to them to actually find the viruses and go after the viruses. Now, what's interesting is the energy currency that those macrophages need in order to do their job circulating around the body looking for these things comes from the gut. And the biggest source of energy are short-chain fatty acids. So the increased production of short-chain fatty acids supports your peripheral defense system, which are macrophages, which will then go out there and find these latent viruses and bring them under control. So using the probiotic and prebiotic helps in a significant way from that respect. So it can help upregulate your peripheral macrophages so that they have the capability and the energy stock to go out there and find these viruses. Now, outside of that, a compound that seems to help a lot of people with viral infections is lauricidin. Lauricidin has a antiviral property to it. Some people use the colloidal silver. I've never seen a whole lot of good research or information on its ability to work on something like EBV or cytomegalovirus, but some people swear by it. But certainly the lauricidin has been used in medical clinical practice for a while as an antiviral. So if you combine the two, you might see some really profound effects.
Okay, that makes sense. Kind of an indirect action method.
Mm-hmm.
Sensitivities, yes, a fourth of a capsule is fine with the megaspore. We've had people with Lyme disease and like really, really, really sensitive people start as little as 1/8 of a capsule every other day, who then message me 6 months later and say, I just took my first full capsule and I'm doing so much better and I'm so glad I stuck it out. But yeah, some people, it's rare. I mean, most people just don't read the directions and start with 2 full caps right away on the first day and don't experience any negatives to it. But if somebody has a really sensitive system and or lots of infections to deal with, that can definitely
I did a podcast with the host yesterday, and he's a guy that he's had cancer, and he's had severe Lyme disease infection and a bunch of other stuff. So he's gone through the ringer of things that just basically have destroyed him and destroyed his body, but he's all like, almost completely recovered now.
Wow.
And he started the Megaspore back in early 2014. So like about a year since we launched. And he said when he first started it, he could, and this is how he described it. He said he could take a tiny dab of the powder on his finger and put it in his mouth, and he would have like diarrhea from it. Like his Herxheimer reaction was that strong.
Wow.
But in talking to him a long time ago, the message was that's actually a good sign, because it means that you have this insane amount of pathogen establishment, and we can get rid of it using the spores. Now he takes up to 8 capsules a day, right? So imagine a guy that could just take a dipping of the powder and would cause diarrhea for him. Now he's taking up to 8 capsules a day, and of course he's doing amazingly well with his microbiome, despite having gone through rounds of cancer treatment and antibiotic treatment for Lyme disease and so on. But that was like a great, to me, illustration of how you have to baby step into it for some people.
Wow.
It's really important to get to that full dose.
Do you remember the name of the podcast?
Yeah, it was.
I'd like to give that guy a shout.
He actually has a really cool podcast concept, because it's all about. It's called the Beautifully Broken podcast.
Beautifully Broken.
Beautifully Broken with Freddie is his name.
Cool.
It's very cool. It really focuses on like people who have really gone through the ringer with health disorders, and how we can kind of embrace being broken, and what that teaches us, and the psychology around all of that. Really cool guy, really fun to talk to. I'm gonna look him up. Yeah, you should. He's really cool. I think you'll enjoy talking to him.
All right. Cindy, you mentioned SLE and RA. Shoot me an email. I put my email address on there, michael@rebelhealthtribe.com. I'd be happy to share some resources with you on that. I think we can do like 1 or 2 more. I think you got to get going. So you can use them suppository, like enema rectally, but the spores, if you're asking about the subtilis, the HU58, or the megaspore or anything, you'll miss out on some of the actions that they take before they get to the large intestine. So it's not something that we generally, I don't think it'll hurt you, but I wouldn't recommend, because right? That's always been your answer, right? You just kind of miss out on some of the benefits then.
Yeah, there's a lot of really important effects as it goes through the small bowel, especially the Peyer's patches in the ileum. So we don't want to miss out on any of those. You wouldn't do it in an enema in lieu of taking it orally. If you want to do it in addition to taking it orally, then there's no harm in doing that, and maybe you might see an increased effect in the large intestine, but you wouldn't want to do it instead of taking it orally.
Okay. There was a study that came out showing that probiotics prevented the microbiome from recovering after antibiotics. Now, I'm assuming those were like bifido or lacto or something, but they were not spore. Somebody asked if you have a comment on that.
Yeah, so this was a study done with that Israeli group. What they did was they did an antibiotic treatment, and they created their own probiotic, but they used common lactobifidus strains, and so they completely destroyed the microbiome, and then they threw in the probiotics, and basically the probiotics started competing with the binding sites of your natural lacto and bifidus strains. And that's part of what why we've never been that big of fans of these kitchen sink type of formulas. So they actually put together a formula, and I believe it had 25 strains, maybe somewhere between 25 strains of random lactobifido strains. And so those, are versions of what you may have in your gut. And if they do have the capability of surviving and getting to the site of action, they're going to compete with your commensal bacteria for receptor sites, because they bind to the same stuff. So it's not surprising, but what the study did show was that eventually, after several weeks, then your natural microbiome kicked them out and took over. But it slowed down the recovery of your microbiome. Now, in contrast to that, we actually have two studies that are being written up for publication right now on the spores, which I mentioned earlier, where we treated the microbiome with antimicrobials, and you put the spores in, and your microbiome returns much faster. So that's part of why we love the spores, is because we're not creating this competitive environment with your natural endogenous bacteria. We're not putting in microbes that may not fit well in your microbiome and cause other problems. So that study was, it illustrated a potential problem with the conventional approach to probiotics.
Right, that makes sense. I think eating ferments necessary. We've had really mixed. I mean, for some people they do really well. For other people, it really aggravates symptoms. I know if we overeat them here, like too much in a short period of time, we tend to get some GI upset. Mm-hmm. I usually recommend to people to throw them in here or there into their diet like they were used traditionally, but not like giant piles of sauerkraut every day.
Yeah, if you're doing like a wild ferment or something like that, you're not really sure what the organism is that is doing the fermentation, and you may have a sensitivity to what some of the things that organism produces, and a lot of times it's yeast, and so people who tend to be sensitive to yeast may have a sensitive response. If you have a fermented food that you tolerate well, then by all means, use it a few times a week, and it could help you. But again, you do want to be careful.
Okay. All right. I think we're going to have to cut off here. I see a handful of other questions. I tried to answer ones that answered a bunch together. Do you have any long-term use studies in regards to any of these things? Are there long-term use studies in regards to bacillus spores?
Yeah, I mean, bacillus spores have been in the prescription market since 1952. They are a normal part of your commensal flora. So studies have shown that you find them at about 1 billion CFUs per gram of stool in the natural microbiome. So they're a normal commensal part of your of your gut. So there's no real danger in overt exposure. Now, also keep in mind that these are transient in the sense that they leave the body after about 21 days. So even though you're using it every day, you're not just accumulating them every single day. The proportion of the spores in each given area in the gut starts to balance out by equal amounts leaving compared to the amounts coming in. So there's no reason or indication to think that the spores have any sort of adverse event being used long term.
Okay. All right. So we've got the two links at the top of the chat box there. Those two products are in our shop at rebelhealthtribe.com, the Mega Mycobalance and the HU58, mainly due to your demand. So you asked enough times that we made it happen. And the code RHT58 will take $5 off any bottle of those, or I don't think there's a limit on that. I think it's any bottle of either. We're going to have that up till probably about Monday, I think, for the discount. Much of the other things we talked about are in there too. I think the only product of yours we don't carry right now is the Restore Flora, and we might as well just fill the whole shop. So we'll get there. We are going to have a recording of this that will go out. We're going to get it transcribed and put it up on the site with the recording so you can read as well. And if you have questions that we didn't answer, you can shoot them to me at michael@rebelhealthtribe.com, and I will do my best to get them over. I'll get them over to you if I can't answer them. I have I've learned many of your answers at this point, but there's still some that I come across that I can't cover. So if that happens, I'll try to send them over and get those. We do have entire webinars and interviews on Candida, on yeast, on microbiome, on anything microbiome, on autoimmunity, on all of these topics in the microbiome series webinars on our website and on the microbiome masterclass that we did last fall. The microbiome series webinars are all Kiran here, and the microbiome masterclass had 16 experts presenting on different topics microbiome related. Those are both on our site. And we're going to try to we're going to be reorganizing a lot of things on the website in the next few weeks to make everything a little bit more front and center and easy to find. So we will be sending that out once that's done so we can say, hey, look, here's everything. Because we honestly have so much of this content on the site that it tends to get lost and fall in cracks. And so we're going to try to bring it all back front and center so everybody can find it. So wow, we had very little zero drop-off for an hour and 16 minutes, which seems to always be the case. So thanks to everyone who took their time tonight to join us. Thank you, Kiran, as always, for sharing all of this and for creating all this awesome stuff that is helping so many people. And thanks again for helping us out in our situation.
Of course.
We really appreciate that. So
on the recovery, I think you guys should pat yourself on the back for all the work you did to do that. And then now you can inspire others from your journey. Right?
That's the goal. Whoops. All right. So I think we're going to sign off.
Yep.
And thank you. Have a great night. We'll chat soon. Thanks, everybody.